Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday, and thank you for joining me tonight. I am excited tonight about our topics and our content and the material that we're going to cover tonight as it relates to a Scrum Master. So, without any delay, let's get ready to jump on into our material for tonight. Tonight, we're going to cover a few scenarios from a Scrum Master perspective and what would you do. I want to talk about some real scenarios that you're going to experience. But then on top of that, I want to take those scenarios and convert them into interview questions and tell you at least one way to be able to answer it. And then we'll step through the remaining portion of the presentation tonight. But before I get started, I wanted to start out tonight with a question. And the question that came to mind was, if you walk into your office tomorrow and you're not currently a Scrum Master, but your leader says, hey, we're converting you over to a Scrum Master effective now. As a matter of fact, you have a team that's waiting for you to be able to hold your daily stand up. Now, you've seen this team in action, so you already know this team's got some problems. They have some conflicts. They've missed some goals as it relates to their sprint goals. And you know, those stakeholders are not as easy to deal with as you would expect or want. In a moment such as that, would you freeze or would you stand all the way up? I want to walk through some scenarios to be able to have you stand all the way up and not freeze in the moment. And we'll talk about several different components of what that would take for you to be successful in a situation such as that. So, tonight I want to go through specifically the Scrum Master myths, the things that people say that Scrum Masters are, but they really and truly aren't. The core framework, how to apply it. Let's talk about facilitation, servant leadership. Let's discuss coaching as well as being a person who can remove impediments as well as be a change agent for your team. Let's walk through these four scenarios tonight. And in these scenarios, we're going to discuss what that situation is. I want to talk to you about what the real problem could potentially be, what you need to consider, what you want to do. And then that's where we're going to take that same question and convert it into an interview question and how you answer. Then I have a live challenge for all of you that are joining tonight. So stick around and let's see what happens. And then finally, we talk about building your skills and how you can grow and develop as a professional. So, the myths that people have a tendency to say about Scrum Masters is that a Scrum Master only holds this daily stand up that's 15 minutes. People have a tendency to say that Scrum Masters are project managers, or they don't work hard, or they've got their certification. So now they're qualified for the position and they're only there to schedule meetings, when all of those are actually myths. You know, a Scrum Master handles more than just the daily stand up. The Scrum Master, especially if they're part of an Agile release train, they're in way more meetings than just the daily stand up. The Scrum Master is not a project manager because they don't have a project charter, project plan, weekly slides to give executives. That's not even in the wheelhouse of a Scrum Master. Those are not tasks and responsibilities. There is a great divide between what a Scrum Master does versus what a project manager does. Now, granted, there are some similarities between the two, but there are also some major differences that people have a tendency to ignore or overlap. The Scrum Master does not assign work. That is not a task of the Scrum Master. And they may ask, you know, can you handle that amount of work for this particular iteration? But they're not actually assigning the work to the team. Just because you become certified does not mean that you're able to do the job. You've met one of the qualifications of the position in which you've applied for. But just because you've met the qualification for the position doesn't mean that you know how to do the job. There is a clear difference between obtaining your certification and being able to do the job. You have to be able to take the information that you've learned and be able to apply it in real life. That is a transition. Some people can do it automatically. Some people need a little hand holding. It just kind of depends upon who you are. But definitely a scrum master is not one who's consistently scheduling meetings like that. It's more to a scrum master than that. Now, when I started thinking about putting this week's content together, one of the things in which really got my attention and made me want to really talk about these 5 items is that these are the skills that I feel that a successful scrum master will have. And I want to dive into each one of these if possible. So we've got the skills of a facilitator, a coach, servant leader, impediment remover, and a change agent. When I look at the facilitator, I immediately think that a scrum master must naturally have this skill or be a great presenter simply because of the number of ceremonies that the scrum master is involved in, the type of conversations that a scrum master has. You've got to have chops in order to be able to be a scrum master. Facilitation is one part of it, being able to speak to the crowd. But as you're before the people, you also need to have the ability to read the room and to be able to detect if people understand what you're saying, if they're accepting what you're saying, or if they're rejecting what you're saying. A scrum master must be able to do that while facilitating, being able to read that room. A scrum master must also, in the facilitation piece, be able to control the room. I don't know how many meetings you've been in where people overtalk one another or one person controls the conversation. The scrum master in those situations must be able to control the room and not give Jack the floor consistently because Jack has a lot to say. And I'm sorry if there's a Jack that's watching tonight. I'm not picking on you. I'm just using your name as an example. But as a scrum master, you have to be able to control the room to where Jack just doesn't take over. You have to also be able to ensure that everyone's heard, and being able to stop people over talking. In various meetings that I've been in and various ceremonies that I've facilitated, people have a tendency to overtalk one another. And a lot of what I do is that I come back and I say, okay, guys, we all have valid points to make today, but to ensure that we hear everyone's point or we understand what everyone's talking about, let's have one person speak at a time. It's hard to hear multiple conversations and be actively engaged in more than one conversation at a time. So, if someone's speaking, raise your hand. And then what we'll do is kind of go through and, allow everyone else to speak who has their hand raised. When you are facilitating a meeting as a scrum master, people will know if you are weak or if you are strong as it relates to facilitation. And when people identify that you're weak, your meetings have a tendency to not go well. So you have to be able to, like I said, be able to read the room, be able to understand kind of what everyone's asking for, because how you facilitate a meeting determines if you have buy-in or buy-out. Buy-in meaning that people believe what you're saying and people understand and they're on board with you, or people are like, you know what, she has absolutely no clue and tap out. You've been in a meeting where you've said that before. So when you look at facilitation from a scrum master perspective, my recommendation is this: don't freeze when the spotlight is on you. Stand all the way up when the spotlight's on you. We'll move on over to coaching. Coaching and developing people is something that I absolutely love doing. So this part of being a scrum master is natural for me. You grow people at the level in which people desire. Now, let me dive into that just a little bit. When you grow people at the level in which they desire, that means you've sat down, you've had some conversation with that individual, and you're asking, okay, you're my developer today. Talk to me about what you know about the framework. That developer explains to you what they know about the framework. As the scrum master, now you're listening to say, how can I help them grow? How can I help them develop? Do they understand how critical they are in us completing this particular iteration, completing this PI? Do they understand their role is important to the overall organization's success? When you go back and you start to explain that to an individual and you get that developer to understand their role in the overall goal for the organization, and you begin to get them to understand how they contribute from a daily standpoint, daily stand up perspective, from the backlog grooming, you help them understand all of those elements of what they need to do in those roles. What happens as you gain those conversations with those people, they believe you, they trust you. So now, when you're asking your developer to do something different, your developer is more apt to do it because your developer has seen she's coaching me, she's helping me grow. When you show your developer how they're important to the organization, you've actually just given your your developer a pole to fish for themselves now. So you're not giving them a fish. You taught that developer how to fish on his or her own, which is successful and great for that person. Um my recommendation, like I said, is to keep the person in mind whenever you're coaching them. What is their desire? How do they want to grow? I had a team at one point with people who were at various levels. You know, you had seasoned professionals who were waiting to retire. You know, you had that middle ground person who's still trying to grow and develop. And then, of course, you had the newbie who's just trying to, understand everything that's happening in the workplace. So keep in mind, as a scrum master, you're going to have people in different levels, in different areas of their career. Coach them accordingly. For the person who is on the edge of retirement, still take the time to show them how their role is important, how they can continue to grow and develop. They may not want to be the next CEO, but how can they be successful up until the point of their retirement? That middle ground individual, you're providing some of the same information, but probably going a little bit more in detail because that person's wanting to grow, that person's wanting to move around. Be able to coach them in those particular areas. And then finally, the new one, get them to understand what the framework is and help them along as well. Now, servant leadership is another, um, I call it my gift. You know, being able to serve others and put others before myself is something that I do naturally. But as a scrum master, it should be a characteristic that's within you to be able to help someone before you help yourself and be the advocate for the team. When you're in meetings with the stakeholders and they're asking you about the team, be transparent. Tell them where the team is struggling. But when you tell them that the team is struggling, have a level of confidence in it as well and confidentiality to where you're not really giving names of individuals, but you're talking about the team from a team perspective. When I think about servant leadership being a characteristic, it's a characteristic that if you really and truly have servant leadership within you automatically, it is that characteristic that sets you apart from any other leader in the building that does not have servant leadership. I think about it when um just stopping. If someone comes in and they ask me what to do, Hey, Dion, I need your help here. I'd stop what I'm doing, and be able to help the team. Hey, Dion, I have an impediment, which is their next topic, being an impediment remover. Hey, Dion, I'm waiting on Bill to pass me over the code and I can't get it from Bill. And he's been not, he hasn't responded to me for the last 2 days. Well, I'm your servant leader and I'm your impediment remover. And I'm going to get up and I'm going to reach out to Bill. If Bill's in the same building, I'm going to Bill. But if Bill's not in the same building, Bill's in a totally different location, I'm reaching out to Bill. If I don't receive an answer from Bill in a reasonable amount of time, I'm reaching out to Bill's boss. Because what I'm doing as your scrum master is I'm trying to remove this impediment for you as quickly as possible because I know it's impacting the amount of work that the team has to get done by the end of this iteration. So that's one of the things that I do as an impediment remover. Sometimes when you have an impediment on the team, you really have to think about what is the issue. Is it like, me calling Bill and getting the code that we need? Is it just that simple? Or do we have too much work to complete by the end of the sprint? Can I get some additional resources? Can I go and escalate this matter and clear the pathway for the team to be able to work? So, as a scrum master, I would also say when you're looking at removing impediments, you want to also include your critical thinking skills to be able to solve the problem for the team as quickly as possible. Now, change agent and being a change agent is fun stuff. As a change agent, think about it this way: people don't want to change. And sometimes it's hard for people to change. Think about driving into work every day. You probably drive into work the same way every day. You haven't changed the direction in which you drive to work because you're comfortable with the way. You know exactly where to turn, you know exactly how many lights, you don't even know if there's any school zones. So, getting someone to change just natural behavior can be challenging. You have to deal with the mindset of that individual first. You have to change the mind of the people. You have to coach and educate them on the change being something that's positive and not something that's negative. I when I look at change, I often think of change being something that is often dark for people, something that they don't trust, something that I almost want to say they're afraid of. But as their scrum master, you have to be the light. You have to be the light in the midst of darkness and be able to show them that the change that's expected and desired is going to move everyone forward. One of the largest change challenges that I see now is people integrating AI into the workplace and a lot of people resisting the change. It's a mindset. It's a mindset that could it take over jobs? It could potentially take over jobs. But if you go into the whole process thinking it of it that way, you lose. Instead, think of it more or less as okay, I'm a scrum master. I have this job. AI is being implemented. How can I merge it to make me even more successful? How can I merge my job and AI together to be a benefit to the team? So always put a positive spin on change and be that light because change is already um, difficult at times to handle. All right, what Scrum Masters actually do. So, what Scrum Masters actually do for the team, they coach the team. They make their teams become self-organized, self-managed teams, and they resolve the conflict. One of the ways in which a scrum master can create a self-organizing team is definitely by coaching them, but also by allowing them to handle a few of the ceremonies on their own. And what I mean by that is that there were times in which I would have different team members play different parts for me, meaning that my developer would be my tester. I mean, not my tester. My developer would be my scrum master, excuse me. And they would facilitate the daily stand up. I would have another tester or developer come in and do the same thing. And the reason why I did it was, first of all, to give them a better understanding of my job and my responsibility at the time, but then also to give them another platform where they would have to facilitate. Now I'm enhancing their skill set. But then more importantly, when I did not show up for a daily stand up, they were there and they were able to organize, conduct the business without me being there. It is important for you to get your teams to be self-organizing teams, because when you get your teams there, it makes your life so much easier as a scrum master. Um Now for the scrum master, what a scrum master does as it relates to the product owner, build a partnership, with the product owner, be able to have collaboration sessions. I found that meeting with my scrum, I'm sorry, meeting with my product owner um bi-weekly, just a one-on-one for us to talk about, what are you thinking for this next sprint? What are you seeing? What are you expecting? Um, going both ways, it made the relationship with me and the PO a lot easier, and it made our work go a lot faster because we understood each other in advance. So definitely make sure that you're having partnerships with your product owner. Now for the organization with the scrum master, when you remove the impediments, you're driving toward the goal of the organization, and you're working with that leadership to get them to understand what agile is, how they play a part, because there are times in which you're coaching the leadership on these ceremonies and events as well. So don't be afraid to have a conversation with an executive as to his or her duties. Sometimes they really don't know, but if you're there to help facilitate and help them to understand, then it's going to be great for them on that behalf as well. All right, let's jump into these situations. I'm excited for these. I'm very excited for these tonight. Our first one, and I'm looking to the side because my screen's here, so give me a moment. So the first situation is the silent sprint goal failure. And overall, this is just basically where the sprint didn't go well. So let's talk about it. So this team has had 3 sprints in a row where they didn't meet the sprint goal. And now you get to the end of the sprint, no one's raised an issue, no one said that there's a problem, no one said anything. But the product owner is now losing confidence because he's like, "Did I pick the wrong team to do the work?" So, what's the real problem? The real problem isn't that the team um the team let's just say it this way. The real problem is that the team missed the goal, but on top of that, no one raised their hand to say that there was an issue. So that tells me for this particular team, there's something happening that somebody's not saying. What would you do if this were your team? Think about that for a moment. This is your team. This is the problem that you're having. Think through, what would your answer be? You want to consider, what they've estimated versus what their capacity, not necessarily what their capacity is, but what they've estimated, right? You want to look at, are the daily stand-ups, just status reports? Or are you really looking toward the progression of the work that was assigned for that set time period? Is the product owner adding work mid-sprint? What are you thinking? Well, when you look at this, what you want to do And my recommendation would be when you have your retrospective at the end of the sprint, change the name of that retrospective and focus that retrospective specifically on planning accuracy, is what I would call that retrospective. Here is where you want to have an opportunity where the team can really let down their hair and tell you what's going on. Your product owner's not in there. It's just you and the team. If the team really trusts you, they're going to tell you what's happening. Before that meeting and before that event, as a Scrum Master, you should have already pulled the metrics over the past 3 sprints. Look at who's been allocated how much work. Look and see, are we even estimating the amount of work that we're doing correctly? Do we need to make changes? Am I saying this is worth 3 points when it's really worth 8? And if I've given someone two stories to work on, and the stories are 3 points apiece, instead of giving you 6 points to work on, I've really given you 16. So look at those metrics before you walk in, so you have an idea of what those results are before you bring this group together. You want this session to be a session where the team can be completely open. You don't want them to blame one another. You don't want it to be a griping session either. You want it to be a session where they can actually be open. This is also where your facilitation skills come in, because as the leader in the room, you'll have an opportunity to read the room to be able to see if they're telling you the truth or not. And then you want to be able to um, show them how to come to a resolution and how to create a plan to where they're not missing the sprint goal. You want to create a plan that makes them more comfortable to call out risk and issues early in the sprint, not at the end or not at all. Because not calling out the issues during the sprint and not calling out the issues at all raise even more questions and problems. So that's the way in which you want to have the team to flag these risks and issues. Now, when I looked at this particular situation, I said, "Oh my gosh, this would be a great interview question." When someone's asking you, "Hey, tell me about a time you had a sprint team and they missed the goal. They missed the sprint goal. What did you do?" Now you can think through and say, "Well, I treated my um I don't treat how did I say this? I have not treated missed sprint goals as a systematic signal, not an individual failure. I've used the daily scrum and the data that you have to identify where the gaps are, and you facilitated a retrospective focus specifically around planning accuracy, for the team to be transparent." So I think that that's a good way to answer this particular question. When you're in an interview, the person may ask you some additional follow-up questions, but at least high level, you have a way in which you can answer this first situational question. All right. Our second question this evening is talking about your developer who won't follow Scrum. There is a senior developer that continues to skip your daily Scrum meetings. This person believes that it's just a waste of time and push back. If they push back on your sprint planning estimates, they openly tell the team that it's unnecessary. So you really have someone on your team that's causing a problem, in short. So the real problem here isn't a compliance issue. It's a trust and a value issue. This person does not believe in the event, the value of the event, or the importance of them attending. So I'm going to pause here and ask you now, what would you do if you were the scrum master of this team? While you're pondering on what you'll do, put into consideration this. Has this person seen the team work well, or has the team always failed while they were on there? What's the real root cause for this person's pushback? They've got resistance. Is it the framework? Is it how you're running the meetings? I mean, what's really going on? And the team dynamics. Is this a person on your team that doesn't like somebody? Are they ignoring people? Have they always been a challenge across the organization? These are things in which you factor in. Now, what you can do is have a one on one with this person, which is what I would do. And I would probably have it sooner rather than later. And let me explain. I say sooner rather than later because when I'm going to call it out of control behavior is continuous and unchecked, the team will lose faith in you as a scrum master. So I would call the person in and just have a conversation. I'm curious as to why you think the ceremony is a waste of time. Why are you pushing back on sprint planning? Explain to me where you're finding a challenge within the framework and us being able to capture information from you as well. Let that person talk. Don't solution, just let them talk. Listen to everything that they're telling you. And then from there, identify where your low hanging fruit is. Because when people tell you what their problem is with a task, identify where the low hanging fruit is and say, okay, that's an easy win. I can help change that. Now, there may be some more complicated and more challenging things that this person may bring up. Break those out over time because you may not get them to change overnight. But if you can show them in small increments how their value is important to the work of the overall team, it would be great. If I'm asked this interview question, I actually have had this situation before. And my developer in that case, um, he started missing various ceremonies. It wasn't that he thought it was a waste of time. He just didn't want to come. And so I did pull him in to a one-on-one and we had a great conversation. I said, explain to me why you're not attending the meetings. And for him, his reason was most of the people on the team were new. They didn't understand the framework. And, he did not feel as if it was worth his time because we were going through, some of the elementary pieces of the framework and getting these individuals to understand. So he thought it was a waste of his time because he thought the conversation was beneath him. Got it. I immediately recognized what the low hanging fruit was. The low hanging fruit was to switch it to where he played a more critical role in the daily stand-ups and in the various events to help provide clarity around some of the questions that people were asking. Not just having me answer those questions, but because he was a seasoned professional, I leveraged him to help the others grow and develop. And I reminded him, I said, keep in mind that there was a point that you weren't sure about what the framework was, right? Everyone had to learn it. And he was like, well, yeah. So, well, then this is your opportunity to take someone by the hand and be able to help them grow and develop. Don't know if anyone's done it for you, but at this point, make that your responsibility to help someone else grow and develop. And so, there were times in which if I saw that he was falling back and not really helping anyone, I would call his name. Hey, John, can you answer that? That's a great question that Bill had. I think you've had some experience with that. Can you help him? boom, he would jump in and answer the question. So I kept making him feel valuable in the process. Now that's how I'd answer that interview question. What's our next situation question? Ooh, micromanagement. Mm. Now, everyone probably has experienced a micromanager in your lifetime. If you haven't, keep living. A micromanager is someone that just basically hovers over you to where getting the job done becomes so difficult. If they would just get out of the way, it would be great. But sometimes people can't help themselves. So in this particular situation, you have a product owner who he starts assigning specific tasks to individuals. Sometimes he'll even do this in the middle of a sprint and he'll bypass the entire team. He'll not even put in consideration the sprint goals or anything like that. But then he asks also for them, hey, you guys had a daily stand up. Tell me what's going on. Now, the real problem is that the product owner is overstepping and desiring more control than what's required. Now, if this was your team, think about what you would do. Now, a couple of things in which I would say consider as you're thinking through what you would do is that there's evidently somewhere a lack of trust with the product owner. There is an anxiety behind what needs to be delivered, or there's even pressure from higher up. Sometimes people aren't able to take pressure that comes. If you're getting pressure from the top in order for your teams to perform, some people will take that pressure that's coming from up top and push it straight down to the team. But a great leader takes that pressure that's coming from leadership, absorbs it, identifies how can I take what they're asking, get results, but do it in a format to where they don't feel the pressure that I'm getting. It's possible. So, what you could do in this particular situation, again, is have a direct conversation with the PO and be respectful about it, of course. When you have this conversation and explain to them that that's not a responsibility of theirs within this framework, that there's certain ways in which we work, and it's called ways of working. And specifically calling upon people during an active sprint and giving additional work and asking for follow ups is not part of it. You have to be able to trust the team to work on the work in which you've given them for that particular time period. Now, this is a great question again that could be easily asked during an interview. And an answer that you could provide would be I had to coach the product owner rather than police them. I found out, what the product owner was asking was beyond the control of what was needed. So basically, I had to have that conversation to where let's look at the sprint review. Let's make the sprint review stronger. But, you can't really bypass the team and go straight to individuals for work because it impacts our overall metrics. That's one of the ways in which you could answer this question for scenario 3. Let's dive on into scenario 4. I hope you guys are liking this because I'm loving these scenarios. All right. Now, the fourth scenario is stakeholders adding work mid sprint. I'm not sure what it is with stakeholders and sometimes product owners wanting to add work in the middle of the sprint. Put in consideration that when you've planned out a sprint, people have considered their time off, the holiday, And when you plan a sprint, you're providing work to an individual that's within their bandwidth and capacity for that time period. Anything other than that, you're overloading the individual. When you overload your people, you lose your people. It may not be immediately, but if you consistently overload your people, you lose them. I've watched phenomenal developers, I've watched amazing testers and test leads walk out the door because the amount of work that was placed on them impacted their quality of life. When you impact somebody's quality of life, they will find something else. So being able to explain that honest sentence to a stakeholder or to a product owner at times will back them up a little bit. Now, you can have senior stakeholders that will approach your developers directly. They'll approach your testers directly. Hey, I just need you to do this. This is real quick. I need you to do this work and get it done for me. It's kind of how it comes across. The real problem here is that the scope is increased. It's outside of what was planned. It's outside of what the product owner said we were going to do. So, listening to all of that, think about what you would do if this was your scenario and or situation. What you want to consider is, does this team feel safe saying, my scrum master's got my back, or my scrum master doesn't have my back, or can I even have this conversation with my scrum master, or this is a big wig reaching out to me asking me to do the work, I can't tell him no. Yeah, you can. You can tell them no. And what I would do, and I've done this because I've had this situation as well occur, to where the stakeholder was going directly to, and I'll tell you, this guy was great. I've never seen a gentleman be able to code at the degree that this guy could do. I mean, he had people from other departments pulling and tugging on him because he was just that good. Now, we could give him work for that particular sprint, but he was good enough to get that work done plus some, but it was at a cost. So, um, it actually came out in one of my retrospectives is where it came out. And he said, Dionne, I need to talk to you directly. Cool. So once we got done with the retrospective, I actually pulled this gentleman to the side. I said, what's happening? And he told me, he said, the stakeholder is reaching out. And because I've done it a couple of times, I've done some work that he asked me to do. Now he's adding even more work beyond what I'm already assigned. I said, I got you, because I had what? The magic word. I had trust with this gentleman. I got it. Your name won't be called, but we're definitely getting ready to deal with this problem. So I reached out to the stakeholder, and we'll call him John in this situation. I said, hey, John, I need to talk to you. Hey, Dionne, how are you? I'm great. And I began to explain to him that, what I need from him is any additional work that he needs for the team to work on. Bring it to the entire team, because we've assigned work based upon availability, based upon capacity, based upon skill, and based upon knowledge. And when you reach out to people directly and ask for additional work to be done, you're impacting quality of life, because these people are still responsible for doing the work that they committed to at the beginning of this sprint. And then, of course, this SVP was telling me, he's like, well, Dionne, I've got this person and this person breathing down my back because they need the work done right away. I just need for you, John, to tell me that this work needs to be done ASAP. I'll make sure it goes into the next sprint planning and we'll work on this work first. In the event it has to happen immediately, I've got to bring the team together and we need to realign. And after having that conversation with him, I did tell my developer, I said, hey, when he calls you back or if he calls you back, send him to me. And the SVP did reach back out to him. He said, hey, and my developer said, hey, I need you to reach out to Dionne. I'm in the middle of working on this story and I can't stop. I'm at a critical point, but reach out to Dionne and see what we can do. And that was the answer that I would have the team give going forward. Hey, reach out to Dionne, and see exactly what could be done. And what it allowed me to do was it allowed the team to show that I had their back and that I was going to protect them at all costs. I'm not going to say I really didn't care who the SVP was, but because I did. But more than that, I felt like I was skilled enough to have that hard conversation with the SVP and yet protect my people in the same breath. I think those are all my scenarios. Yeah, those are all my scenarios tonight. Like I said, I really thought about these various scenarios and I wanted you guys to think through these scenarios because these are things in which you could easily be asked when you're going through an interview. You want to be able to identify what the potential issue is, what metrics you're going to use if you have to use any metrics, and how you can provide a polished answer. Think through these again and again. Come back to this video and listen to it again, and then tailor the answer to yourself. And I am going to request that you practice the answer because hearing me go through the answer, it's a live situation. So I know exactly what happened. But if you haven't had the situation and you got to think through an idea of how you would resolve an issue such as this, you want to practice it because if you haven't practiced it and it comes out and they come in with a follow up question, whomever's interviewing you has a follow up question, and your answer for the follow up question doesn't match the original answer that you provided, people know. So take this opportunity to go back to these situations, identify how you're going to answer them, and be prepared if you have an interview. All right. So for this live challenge, what I want you to do, I want you to think about a team in their retrospectives and how the retrospective has become formal. You know, what did we do well? What did we not do well? How can we improve going forward? You have that conversation enough. It's like, it's just automatically in your mind. And you have the same 3 complaints every sprint. You don't see any change. It just keeps coming up. Excuse me. And then your audience, because the cadence is static, it's the same, you start losing people. So out of your 7 people that are on your team, now you only got 4 people to show up. So between now and next week, I know it says here 2 or 3 minutes, but I'm not even going to do it that way. I want you to think about that. And then what I'll do when we do webinar Wednesday next week, I'll open up with some answers in some ways in which you can change your sprint retrospective and how you can continuously have people engaged. What would you do for that next retrospective? How would you plan it even 2 weeks after that? Think about that. And we'll come back to that question. All right. Now, I've always got to throw something in here as it relates to growth and development because I believe that you are the person who grows you. If you're in a workplace where someone can grow you, great. But I'll tell you up front, the responsibility of your professional growth and development is solely on you. If you're looking at a Scrum Master growth and development pattern, how can I grow? You start out with a CSM or an SSM. You work as a Scrum Master. You do that about 2 to 4 years. Now, I'm aggressive, so I may do it 1.5 years to 2 years. But you go in, you learn Jira, you learn Confluence, you learn Miro, you learn Rally, you learn whatever the organization is using. You become fluent in whatever systems they're doing. You become comfortable as a facilitator. You become comfortable with the mic. You build relationships with stakeholders. So that's another skill set that you have in your wheelhouse. Your next step would be to become a release train engineer. That's more or less like a program manager. Now, in that capacity, now you're looking at facilitating PI planning. So no longer are you looking at rooms that have maybe 7, 15 people at the most. You're not looking at that anymore. You're looking at a planning session with hundreds of people. So your facilitation needs to be on point and your facilitation needs to be ready. I think about a PI planning session that I had planned, and for the business context, the gentleman decided to drive into work during the time at which he was supposed to present. And he called in, because we were doing it remotely. And he called in and he said, when I got to him, he said, "Hey, Dionne, I can't do my presentation because I'm driving into work. It's going to take me about an hour to get there and get set up." And I said, "Thanks." And immediately, with hundreds of people looking at me, I had to make a decision and I had to make it quick. So I immediately went to my architect and said, "Hey, are you here? Are you ready to present?" My architect said, "I'll present." I said, "Okay, this is what we're going to do." And I changed the schedule immediately. So my architect had an opportunity to speak. I brought in the EVP to speak to the entire art for about 10 minutes. We took a break. And then when we came back from that break, the business department was ready to be able to give his part of the presentation. But you have to be an excellent facilitator and you've got to be able to think um off the top of your head, because you're dealing with a ton of people, a lot of different departments. It's cross functional whenever you're bringing PI planning together and you're facilitating that. And then the next step that you could go in your growth pattern would be to become a senior scrum master, agile coach, an SPC. Here you're training it from it being agile from an enterprise level. It's not just, "Hey, I got this team," or, "Hey, I got this art." It's a little bit more than that. Normally, you'll see an SPC or an agile coach have multiple arts. And you're just talking technical fluency with them. You're looking at delivery metrics across the board and you're pushing the organization and training the organization to change. So before I go into what we offer, like I said, I'm a big, big person on your professional growth and development and being able to move you forward. I talked to, and I think I said this in the last one, someone who did not leverage their tuition reimbursement at the company. And I spoke with another lady about a few days ago. And she said she had been with her company 18 years. So 18 times whatever the organization's going to pay you or reimburse you for growth and development. It's just money that you leave on the table. Don't leave that money on the table. I don't know where else you can get the type of funding to do what you're wanting to do as far as growth and development is concerned. Use it. So when we talk about what we offer here at KDMJ Solutions, we are very, very big on getting your certification. That's the first step. $800 is 2 days. you know, you get your own portal through Scaled Agile. You have access to all the training material, all the slides and things of that nature. And even behind that, they have your portal set up to where you get additional information beyond what's on the slide. So, we may talk about sprint planning, or we may talk about PI planning, but the content that they give you behind that is even more in detail, which makes you more successful. I think they've even added portals now to where you have like a community to where you can talk to other scrum masters and things of that nature. So that's an $800 training class. And we have a class coming up, if I am not mistaken, this Saturday is our next class. Then we have it to where, okay, Dionne, I want to get my certification, but I also want just your workbook for the Agile Career Academy. That one is 1449. So you go through the 2 days of training for your Scrum Master certification, and then you get the workbook that takes you through the 5-week program. So you just get all the content for that. And then the final portion, of course, is the Agile Career Academy, which is a 5-week program. Um, it's 5 weeks where that first week we get your training. The second week is the interview. So we have an AI driven agent that'll interview you at the end. I do mock interviews with you. You have a workbook that's granted to you. We go through various level of interview questions. You also have a handheld, opportunity to like an app to where you are able to go through various interview questions and practice them on your own. It's important that you go through a lot of the interview questions and practice them. Say them out loud, say them in the mirror. Because it sounds so elementary and it sounds so fundamental and it sounds like a far-fetched point of advice, but it's not, because when you actually look at yourself and how you're responding, that's how the person who's interviewing you is going to see it. So you want to make sure that not only your body language, but your facial expression and your answers are on point. The next week we go through live coaching sessions. We start walking through the various ceremonies, and you get a chance to facilitate ceremonies, ask questions. How could I have done this better? Or I'm not comfortable. Can I do that again? Can I start over? Then we look at your resume. Make sure that your resume has the key words on them. We make sure that your LinkedIn profile is set up correctly. And then that last week, we go back over everything else. We go back through we go back through the interview questions. We go back through the simulators. We just go back through a whole bunch to make sure that when we close that 5th week off, you're completely done. And that program is $49.97. Now, I've included the QR codes for each one of those that takes you directly to where you need to be if those are the options that you want to take. Your next challenge. All right. Also, for next Wednesday, answer this interview question. What would you do? Oh, that's the question that we had. What would you do if your team consistently missed their sprint goal? Um, no, that's different. What would you do if your team consistently missed a sprint goal? And then we talked about um, the retrospectives and how you would change those up. So you have 2 questions for homework. Now, if you're not able to make the webinar next Wednesday, I do ask that on this video, you post your response of what your answer is going to be. Now, before I leave tonight, I do want to share a sneak peek of something that we are working on. It is not quite ready, but I want to share it with you guys tonight. And because you're here with me at this time, I'm going to share it. And it is our Agile ceremonies. This is a simulator that we've put together that takes you through all of the ceremonies, whether you are a CSM or an SSM, and it takes you through all of the various ceremonies. And you get a chance to, identify who should attend, what's the recommended time frame, what's the purpose of the ceremony, what's my checklist, step by step facilitation opportunities. Here's a script. What are some of the common challenges, facilitation best practices, realistic scenarios, and being able to go through and have this on hand, I think is very, very important. So we are still working on this. It's not done just yet. It's still in beta. We're looking to launch it in September. So also put in the chat if this is something that you are looking forward to, and let me know so that I can make sure that I notify you once it's ready to go live, so that you'll be able to see the wonderful product that we have. Like I said, I'm all about your growth and development. I want people to grow, I want people to develop. And the way people grow and develop is to come together, have great conversation about great content. So, thank you for joining this Wednesday. I look for you guys to join next Wednesday. You got a couple of homework questions that you can answer. I'm definitely going to answer them at the top of the call next week. So, can't wait to see you then. Until the next time, you guys enjoy your night.